Started. My name is Danielle Panton, and I am currently a student at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, where I attend the RBS school. I am a programming intern for the Center of Women in Business, and thank you all for attending the panel on meeting the needs of an ever-evolving intersectional talent landscape. So today we'll be talking about remote and hybrid work, women who identify as veterans, LGBTQIA+, or have disabilities. While remote work has benefited many, it can also create added challenges for women that identify with other marginalized groups. So today, the panelists will discuss their research findings, share personal experiences, and offer ideas to enhance inclusivity in hybrid workplaces. Moderating this panel, we have Samantha Santos, the global head of DEI and strategy at Citi, who throughout over 20 years of experience has worked at top firms, including Goldman Sachs, Meta, and Bloomberg. This panel also includes Lucy Del Gaudio, who is a veteran advocate and equity and inclusion leader who served as the founding co-chair for the New Jersey SOS Veteran Stakeholders Women's Subcommittee, as well as Mason Ameri, an associate professor of professional practice at Rutgers Business School, with his research focus being on disability employment, and has received several noteworthy recognitions, including the Presidential Award for Excellence in Teaching, the Provost Award for Excellence in Teaching Innovations, and the Poets and Quants Best 40 Under 40 MBA Professors. We also have Michelle Petrozuolo, who is the Director of DEIA and Talent Development at Philips and was recently featured at the Forum of Workplace Inclusion in Minneapolis. I'm excited about this panel because I'm just excited for you all to hear these really great opinions and experiences, and I'm now going to turn it over to Sue.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So really excited to dive into this conversation. I had the pleasure of meeting everyone before this a couple of weeks ago over Zoom, so I know you're going to get some great insights. And, we've been talking about how the pandemic has drastically changed the nature of our work and the ways in which we work. So I'm going to ask everyone how employees experience corporate culture in their firms and how we must embrace this new reality. We want to refer to a study from Gartner that said that 25% of remote or hybrid knowledge workers feel connected to their company's culture. So in light of this, we want to understand from the panelists, how are you creating inclusive culture considering this? And so who wants to start first? All right.
End of the table, so I don't mind kicking things off.
Thanks, Michelle.
So, one of the things that I have heard repeatedly as we've talked in a number of different sessions is, some of these questions are not new questions, even though they feel new. And I think the culture question is not a new question. One thing that comes to mind for me is I've consulted with small growth stage businesses, they're going from maybe 10 or fewer employees up to 30, 50 employees and saying, our culture is changing so dramatically and I don't know what to do about it. And what I've always said to them is culture needs to be intentional. It is something that can be an organic outgrowth of just a number of people being in the same room together all of the time, but that's one that you have no control over. And if you happen to like the culture that came out of that, then you need to be intentional in keeping it. And so, as we go into a situation where we have people who are working hybrid, the question again becomes an old one because, if you're a global company, you have people who are working in different, countries, different time zones. And if you weren't thinking about this before, then those people already are feeling excluded because things don't happen on a time frame that works well for their life. Or, we just forgot about that person because they work out in Illinois and we're here in New Jersey, and we have to keep remembering to include that other person. So, at Philips, the things that we do is we try to make intentional moments for people to have just opportunities to be with one another. We have a Slack channel where we will put just random non-business related questions where people can just come in and say, what's your Halloween costume this year? Our Slack channel for the dogs of Philips is possibly our most active one. And that's just an opportunity for us to share a little bit about who we are as people and not just as those automatons that you interact with when you need something from us. So really, I think it's about, making intentional choices. And that means having a really good definition and understanding of what is that culture that you want, and then what would it take for us to get there. Table Lucy.
Sure. So for us, I mean, at the time that the pandemic hit, I was working for a financial institution and I was working in culture and engagement. It was how are we going to maintain that water cooler talk? How are we going to make sure that everybody is going to feel comfortable? Because remember, we got behind cameras. Extroverts became more extroverted. Introverts didn't know what to do sometimes because the introversion for me, it was very frustrating. At times, I am a veteran. I'm very open about my post-traumatic stress disorder. So for me, at times, I was really on it, and sometimes I was really off of it. And at those times, I had to really find the vulnerability within inside me and try to tell those individuals around me, hey, not going to see me on camera today. Hey, I'm going to be on camera, but maybe I'll be a little bit more silent than usual. So then when the whole going back into work, I really had to find, some of the employers wanted you to check in to certain desks. You didn't have your accommodations set. So those type of feelings. Again, with my PTSD, I'm very OCD. So at times I would go into the office and I have to kind of I have to see the exit paths of the office environment. And if a certain desk wasn't available to me, I struggled because I was sitting someplace that wasn't familiar to me. So again, trying to find that yin and yang at times, that's the type of feelings that I had, and those are the type of things that I experienced.
Thanks for sharing that with us because it does make us think about ensuring that we're creating those inclusive spaces for people to really be their authentic selves. So Mason, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I don't own or operate a business or am not part of the private sector. But looking at it from an empirical standpoint, from a research perspective, much of what's been described, this idea of intentionality speaks to preventative maintenance. And what I mean to say is that those frequent communications that managers, leaders, people that are lateral to one another is a non-negotiable. Whether that's the daily check-ins, especially for the newly minted grads that are kind of onboarding and are remote working or hybrid working, this is something that allows for socialization. But further than that, we've got to think about remote work as a means toward building community, which is very ambiguous if you think about being stuck in a grid view and having to actually work together, hustle together. So the argument being this, things from online gaming to online movie nights, they go a long way in building bonds, humanizing this transaction such that, to your very point, we're not automatons getting on with a good day's work. I think more important than that, there has to be some sense of inclusive decision-making. I come from a disability employment background as a researcher. So for me, being part of the environment, living the precept, nothing about us without us, is in this case very much true for remote workers of any make or model, right? Whatever background you have. Because if you're not being asked, whether by surveys, through open forum discussions, et cetera, what is it that works for you as employees, as a community? And if managers are unilaterally deciding what is the right stuff, then you'll likely see a lot of sputtering, right? Rather than this trajectory that we're hoping for. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I love that concept of that inclusive decision making and democratizing that. Now, Michelle, I wanted to ask you a question about, what do you think has been exposed as far as disparities in employment opportunities and job security, and what policy changes need to be addressed in order to address those issues?
Yeah, I think there were good aspects of what came out of the pandemic, and then there were also struggles. And one thing that comes to mind is the expectations of how people from non-majority communities come to work is not just show up as you are, because it would be great if it was. But what it really seems to be is show up in a way that allows you to fit into this paradigm that already existed in a way that feels comfortable to me. And that's hard and actually expensive. And then the pandemic came along and all the hair salons shut down and the nail salons shut down and I couldn't shop for a new dress and all these other things. And I saved a ton of money. And everybody was now on the even playing field of we all look messy right now. And it took down a big barrier. And now all of a sudden that barrier seems to slowly be coming up again. And there is a lack of recognition on the part of people who don't go through those, appearance questions, that now we're actually being expected to do a whole lot more work.
Can I ask you like how you feel that has changed this notion of executive presence and gravitas and how you show that? Because, that continually seems to be something that especially those in marginalized groups face in terms of really trying to think about that next level promotion and such. So how has that played out? Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. And at the risk of sounding strident, to me, the term executive presence is this is how a white male shows up in this space, and that's how we want you to do it too. And we have seen, particularly, I think, if you take a look at women and let's call out Black women specifically as being entrepreneurs who have said, you know what, I'm opting out of this and I'm starting my own business. Black women start more businesses than any other group right now in the United States. And we're seeing this tremendous level of success and they're doing amazing things. And people are going like, whoa, how did they do it? And now you've asked the question, how did they do it? Now I want you to listen to what they have to say and to trust when they say, this is how I did it. And I think to Mason's point as well, we should be asking that question in our companies. How do you best show up at work? And then if you're going to ask me and I'm going to trust you when I give you my answer, then the response that comes back needs to be one of acceptance and understanding and listening more than anything else. And so from a policy perspective, I think that's how we can really be challenging our leaders, our frontline HR team to say, when you look for something that's executive presence, what do you mean? At Phillips, we do a job description review for every job that we post. And it comes over to me and I take a look at each line by line and I say, okay, well, you're asking for this qualification. What does that look like in the job? Why do you need it? And what will it look like when you find the successful candidate? And we have a frank conversation to say, well, a person may show up differently in this situation. So how will that affect the way that you consider them to be successful? And it has led to some tough conversations, but it goes back to a number of the things that make the fine arts world particularly slow to diversify, even though you would think it's a very progressive group of people. We're interested in these sorts of things. We show diverse artists and we want to be showing diverse life experiences in our galleries, et cetera. But then when you look at the people behind the velvet rope, all of a sudden that diversity disappears. It's because we have to challenge that notion. And those of us who are working in this space, who consider ourselves allies, we need to be the ones who are speaking up to challenge folks and say, let's ask a question about this. What if we did it a different way? And what if it looked differently? Let's be willing to be brave.
I love that aspect of checking and challenging and interrupting bias as it happens. So Mason, I'm going to shift to you really quickly. So we've seen a shift in our work models and many organizations are either working remotely or in this hybrid environment since the pandemic. And based on your research, what could you share with us regarding the challenges and the opportunities women with disabilities have faced as a result of what we need to be mindful of? And I want you to talk about your role example because that was a good one earlier.
Oh, thank you for prompting me. Yeah. So I've done a few studies lately on self-advocacy, remote work, hybrid work. What are the pain points? What are the silver linings for people with disabilities in general? And within that sample, obviously, I've included women with disabilities, working women with disabilities. Some of the anecdotes that I've been able to cull, some of the emerging ideas that have generated from these study interviews have been that remote work, hybrid work, virtual work is a blessing and a curse for a person with a disability. A blessing because you've created a port of entry that has been longed for a time. Flexibility being the through line here, okay? And for people with disabilities in general, they've been mostly denied that right, this opportunity under the ADA, because quite frankly, remote work isn't considered writ large a reasonable accommodation. And yet when the pandemic hit, we moved heaven and earth to make remote work for every single person. Now under an RTO rhetoric, the concept of culture is dying if you're away from the office. has potentially undone the gains that we've seen for, in this case, working women with disabilities. All of this to say, flexibility is still a game changer amongst this population. Why? Because now you can establish boundaries around your availability to go to those medical appointments, to take that medical kind of break, or better yet, the kind of mental health days for oneself, right? And reflect and sharpen the axe per se and get back in the game. But especially and more importantly, what we've done is allowed for people to choose how, when, and where to work without discrepancy. And there's data out there to show that productivity hasn't actually faltered. It hasn't diminished. It's only gone up. So when we think about all of this as a silver lining, we also have to take stock of the dark underbelly that kind of embodies remote work, which is to say, to the arguments made earlier on, communication, collaboration, engagement. When it comes to being recognized for the good work that you do, this is lacking in general for many of us that are remote workers, but especially for people with disabilities, or in this case, working women with disabilities. It's like the Wild West. You're out of sight, out of mind. Anecdotally speaking, amongst my participants, for them, it was a means to an end in terms of just being able to kind of work at home and be productive. But what they realized in hindsight was that they're not recognized by their bosses as much. They're not seen for the inroads, the impact that they're making with respect to their job description, with respect to what they're doing for the team. And so for them, they've lost ground when it comes to professional development. What happens then? You self-select, you quit your boss, and potentially you quit the job when you find a best or better alternative. So there is this ebb and flow. There is this yin and yang, as you mentioned it, right? Pros and cons per se to remote work, but especially for people with disabilities, there's this sense of stigma that riddles their work-life experience, their lived experience on the job, particularly when they're remote, because it's perceived as an unfair advantage. So there are policy implications here that I can riff about maybe later on, but it really does beg the question, if we've made these gains and if we've seen that remote work works, why then are we subtracting it? Or how can it be the case where employers can galvanize it, right? Integrate it more intentionally, to the points made earlier, to make this a success?
You know, I want to parking lot that item because I think there's a lot to be said around accommodations, and you're bringing up some good points, especially following up on what Lucy said. So Lucy, I'm going to turn it over to you. We've seen some research from McKinsey on the impact of COVID-19 on women, and the pandemic had an immediate impact on women's employment. So studies show that 1 in 4 women considered leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers versus 1 in 5 men. While all women have been impacted, 3 major groups were cited as experiencing some of the biggest challenges: working mothers, senior women, and Black women. So Lucy, can you share the unique challenges and vulnerabilities that women who are veterans and Black women have faced during the pandemic?
So you hit I fall under all those demographics. I'm Afro-Latina. I'm a mom of 4. I'm bisexual. I'm a veteran with a disability. So right there and then I hit every single
Talk
indicator
about intersectionality.
and the intersectionality of it, because let me tell you, I struggled at times because who did the workplace want me to show up? Am I Lucy the veteran? Am I Lucy the Afro-Latina? Am I Lucy the mother? Am I Lucy the person with a disability? It's really hard sometimes to juggle all those hats. And I feel bad for the people on that side, because I don't want to, I feel like I'm not talking to you, and I'm trying to do my thing here. Their screens, okay. So it's very hard at times because the identification of all these intersections, and then in the workplace, it's a struggle, and we try to work our best. Again, I'm a mom of 4, so trying to work, when COVID hit, I found myself at home. My husband works from home all the time. He has his own business. The house was him and the dog. That was like, and then we came and invaded it. So I was home with my husband, my dog, and 3 out of my 4 children. Okay. So the expectation came that, oh, mom is home. Mom is going to be available to do more for us. Okay. Then came the mental health side of this. When COVID hit, the veteran space was hit really badly when it came to the availability of psych and therapist appointments for the veteran, because they weren't ready to equip themselves of how they were going to get that therapeutics. I was used to seeing my therapist every week from the VA provided, but also the employer I had at the time had therapy available for me in the workplace. So that was swiped away from me relatively quickly. So there's that. And then again, I'm an older woman. Okay. I'm a technologist by trade. I've always been incredibly tech savvy. But again, the younger population that really knew how to develop this tech and work on it very aggressively, the Slacks, all these channels, the signals, everything, Teams, you name it, it was very adaptable. So it was very, very difficult at times to negate all these different situations in my head and process them at the same time. So again, what I found was my intersectionality, I had to ball it up into one ball and be that person all the time. And then in the unique situations where they go, hey, Lucy, you know, the VetNet BRG needs you to speak. I became the veteran. Hey, Lucy, the women's BRG needs you to speak. I became that Afro Latina woman. Hey, Lucy, with the disabilities, Disability In wants you to go to their conference. Boom, I put on the disability veteran hat. So again, those variables they webbed, you know, ebbs and flows. Again, the yin and yang, because sometimes it is fantastic to be this well, I call my well-rounded intersectionalness. But on other respects, it could be very detrimental, because again, where do I fit in? You know, I've been in situations, am I Black enough? Am I Latina enough? Is my disability that disabling for individuals? So again, it's a mixed pot.
Thank you for that. We're going to stay with you for a second, Lucy, because I wanted to talk about what initiatives or support networks have been successful in combating these issues we've discussed, especially from your lens of that emotional tax that you bear, right? Like having to carry all those different identities and be that poster child for all of those things. And also, how can we be better allies to one another, and what research are we not seeing? And I'd like to ask everyone, but I'll start with you because you really hit it home when you were talking about just the strain and the drain too.
I say allies are all over the place. And I always try to formulate the allies that I witnessed in the workplace. Who are those individuals that always seem to want to talk to me and want to, you know, be there for me, that support mechanism. But I also sought a lot of mentors in the workplace. I saw individuals that at times presented vulnerabilities that I was seeking. And I said, hey, I would email some individuals and say, hey, I saw you speak. Is there any way that you are willing to either, you know, mentor me, or to, you know, have coffee with me once a month or once a week, so we could, you know, I could digest things, so that outside of business, you know, I do belong to a multitude of different veteran service organizations and different associations that have been there for those support mechanisms. But sometimes what I found was the person that I least expected to be the ally that was going to be there to advocate for me, that I didn't think was going to be there for me, was the strongest advocate for me. But also, I had to advocate for myself, because at times people, you know, it's very hard to walk in someone's shoes, and you're the only person that's walking in them or running them. The group knows that I'm running the New York City Marathon on Sunday. So so you know, it's sometimes you don't know how it is to walk and run in these shoes. So I always try, if people have told me at times that sometimes I'm not approachable. I am very approachable, because I love to talk. I love to talk to individuals, and I the questions. And when you say about questions, don't be afraid to talk to a veteran and thank them for their service and be there for them and support them. But also don't make the assumption that, a lot of people always make the assumption that my husband's the veteran or the workplace. Again, male veterans are more identifiable, than women veterans are. So again, I used to wear it very proudly. I had like a dog tag on my lapel jacket when I worked to work, so people knew that I was a veteran, because we don't have those identifiable things. So again, just ask questions, be supportive, be an ally, but also self-advocation is the best way that I looked for support. Thanks, Lucy. I do think self-advocacy is so important. So thanks for calling that out. Michelle?
Yeah, I want to build upon that. I think those of us who have both the seat and the opportunity should take it. Like you with wearing the dog tag, I am bisexual but married to a man, so I'm in a straight passing relationship. And I am so in people's faces about how I'm bisexual because I never want people to forget I'm still here and I still have different needs. So, if you have the opportunity and you're comfortable in doing so, be as out about who you are as possible. And I think it's incumbent upon leaders and managers to just ask, hey, how's work going for you lately? We've gone through a lot of changes. How are you feeling? What do you need? What do you need to do your best? Those of us who've been in DEI work for a long time know that the best solutions come from the community that you're trying to support rather than us telling people what they need. And so we have to ask the question and listen. One thing that comes to mind for me, the pandemic has ended, but a lot of the effects have not. Childcare being one of them. The childcare industry suffered greatly during the pandemic. Many people left their workplaces as far as, being a childcare provider. So there are fewer childcare providers. And those businesses struggled and continue to struggle. And we are on the precipice of a collapse of childcare in the United States. And so primary caregivers, this is still very much top of mind. I think about this all the time. I've got 2 kids, so I've got half as much work as you, but it affects what I'm bringing to work on a day-to-day basis. So at Phillips, the Phillips people don't know this yet, so we're just telling just in this room. We're about to roll out a benefit that will help people to connect with childcare providers and compare pricing and that sort of thing, because this is still an active and live issue. So there are still effects that are being felt, and we need to be willing to be open to what those still are and continue to say, how can we make the workplace work well for you?
Thanks for that. I love that subscribing to the platinum rule, treat people how they want to be treated, not how you would want to be treated. And it's like, we always know about the golden rule, but it's important to subscribe to that platinum rule. Mason?
Yeah, these are great remarks. And it is so inspiring to hear your comments about self-advocacy. Most of my research as of late has been about self-advocacy because it's born out of the disability literature. People with disabilities, quite frankly, do not know how to self-advocate appropriately. And it's kind of arguably based out of their upbringing, right? Higher education in particular, where programmatic support systems like career services help you make the perfect first impression when it comes to your vita, when it comes to your simulations and how you greet one another, how you riff about and talk shop about your hard skills. But when it comes to the component of knowing oneself, knowing your limits, your disability, the accommodations that help you bridge that gap to remain productive, to perform without discrepancy, without fail, these things don't quite exist. There's not enough training curricula out there in higher education for women with disabilities, for people with disabilities in general, to again know how to tactfully and diplomatically communicate their needs in the interest of protecting their bottom line, but also the employer's bottom line, right? This status quo on DEI should also really kind of leverage access, right? Especially now more than ever before, because disability is part of this kind of stream of otherness, of people being different. When it comes to remote work, we have not cracked that code. For people in general, this is especially true for people with disabilities. So the argument is, if people with disabilities don't have the skills per se to self-advocate, right, to express their needs in a way that's persuasive, that is mutually beneficial by knowing their rights, but really being leaders for oneself and for others and leveraging those rights, then this is never going to be the success that we're hoping for. We're all hoping for, whether at the executive level, the middle management level, people on the shop floor, the system level writ large. And so for me, from a research perspective, I think, especially when it comes to disability access, we are well overdue when it comes to this type of research area. From a practitioner standpoint, if we're able to then transition our findings to the programmatic level, whether in higher education, whether in the private sector, it would make a tremendous difference in helping close that gap. Remote work has incontrovertibly helped improve disability employment numbers month over month over month over month, year over year since the pandemic. We call it the silver lining. And yet it does kind of raise the question, when normalcy truly hits, and many companies have 86 remote work, truly, major universities to that end. What then happens to the value proposition, the value add, the human resources of people with disabilities, of women with disabilities in this case? So these are questions that I can't answer today, right? Many of us cannot answer today, but it really does kind of build momentum around the need for further research to then share with practitioners such as yourselves.
Thank you. One thing that this, panel has really called out for me, and I know it inherently, but it really does speak to the importance of recognizing that we're all multidimensional, right? And then there are a lot of unseen characteristics of diversity that we just don't think about. So it's really important not to lead with assumptions. And so thank you for, recognizing that and calling it out for us, because I think it's an important part of the work that we do. So we do have time for questions, and we want to open it up to the room, anyone that's streaming in, to ask any questions you may have. So please, are there any questions in the room or on screen? Yeah, we'll pass you the mic. Thank you.
Yeah, I have two questions, one for you, Michelle, and one for you, Lucy. So you said earlier that you do what you call checking and challenging. Say somebody puts up a job description and you're like, why is this? How do you view this person? So I just wanted to know, for practicality, because I'm a professor, I teach. So I want to know how I can bring this to the classroom so that these young professionals, as they go into the business world, can actually come with a flexible mind of taking correction and not just being hard on their own rules. How do you see those challenges that you pick up from the job description transition to flexible co-creation or correlation between that hiring manager and the new employee at whatever level they are working?
A great question. One of the things that has been really useful is that the proof has always been in the pudding. And of course, we have these philosophies on how these things will work, and we have data to back it up. But then when you say to the hiring manager, if you utilize the term well organized, that's one that I see on just about every job description that we put out at Phillips, because you do need to be on top of your game, sure, but that it tends to be a female signaling word. And so we are a female dominated industry, and they say, well, it's just female dominated. That's just how it is. I'm like, nah, we could do better. So I say, change up some of this language here and just look at the candidate pool that comes back. You don't even have to hire anybody yet. I just want you to see what your candidate pool looks like. And predictably, we get more male representation in the candidate pool than we had before. If we take out certain educational requirements that we don't really need, if we hire for skills as opposed to hiring for qualifications, all of a sudden our candidate pool becomes so much more diverse. And people have been asking me since I started at the company, what are we doing wrong? What could we be doing to make our company more diverse? Well, actually, you don't have to make gigantic changes. You need to be willing to be a little bit flexible, to your point. And as soon as those results come in, they go, oh my God, they were there the whole time. Yeah, they really were. And they were just waiting for you to open the door so that they could say, hey, I'm ready to work for you and do an amazing job. And so then that conversation does continue, to your point. So then the next person that we go to, we just put this job description out there and we changed these words, we changed these requirements, and here was the result of the hiring process. We hired this person, and now we're starting to see some different perspectives come into the workplace. And then the work needs to continue, because now we need to like I said, not just say, you're now welcome into this group that was very exclusive and still is, but now you're here, congratulations. Now it's also about continuing to work to say, we need to make sure that this workspace is a place that will feel like a welcome fit for those people. So before we ever started doing any of that work, it was about laying a foundation. We talked about, psychological safety. I said to everyone, you will make mistakes as we go through this journey. If you're learning from it and you're willing to take a bit of a pause and do some self-reflection, that's the best outcome that we can hope for when you make a mistake, is that you then grow from that. So this is a place where it's going to be okay. You're not going to get, I guess, canceled. I hate that term, but that's what we're using. Let's grow from these. And so it created an atmosphere where we can say, okay, I don't have to be perfect. I can accept hearing constructive criticism, but also when you put that constructive criticism out there, are you doing it at the right time, not in front of everybody that the person works with, in a place where they'll be able to receive it well. So it is a holistic approach, but the results always speak for themselves, and I've been really pleased to see that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so to you, Lucy, you talked about how when you attend some meetings, you tell them, oh, my PTSD is not going to make me attend, or I'm not going to turn on my camera. How do you think being upfront has either worked positively or negatively for you in your career?
It's been positive and negative. Sometimes I think the approach that I've taken in some occasions has been detrimental to me, but in others it's been a positive, where I've seen people come to me and say, Lucy, thank you for speaking up, because now I feel more comfortable in saying it. It took me a long time to actually say, I'm Lucy, I have PTSD. And it actually was many moons ago. I was asked to sit in a panel for the disability BRG. I used to work for Prudential Financial. And they reached out to me and they said, Lucy, will you be willing to share your story? I said, absolutely. So I sat in this room with 500 members, colleagues, and for the first time openly said to them, yes, it's true. You saw me getting carted out of a conference room because I had a major panic attack. I was diagnosed with PTSD. And now I come to work and I'm living with accommodations. So that was a positive for me, because then people knew. They didn't realize that sometimes when Lucy was walking down the hallway and I didn't acknowledge someone, that I was having those moments. Now they knew that if I wasn't going to greet you and say, hey, how are you doing this morning while I'm getting my coffee, you knew something was going on mentally with me in my head. So it was, again, it's a curse, but it's also, it's a positive, but sometimes it can be detrimental. Like right now, I'm going back into the job market. I took some time off, and I hesitate sometimes to click that disability checkbox, because am I saying to people, you're hiring someone that has a disability? Do you want that person? So I'm very quick to check my veteran status, but I hesitate to click my disability status. And that's something that I've found in different, and like you said, when it comes to the job descriptions, job descriptions don't say, hey, and I'm disability friendly, or I'm this and that. So it's a blessing and a curse.
We have time for
Thank
one
you.
more question. So does anyone want to ask a question? We could pass that mic around. Okay, we can pass it right on down. Thank you.
I'm curious how we can understand better the young people. For example, the class of 2024 at Rutgers, most of their university experience was either remote or hybrid. And before that, social media, also remote. So how can we understand better how to prepare them for the in-person team experience in the workplace? And are you finding a difference in this generation that is so used to remote work?
Really good question. I mean, and it's interesting because we have the most multi-generational workforce now that we've seen in years with, so I do think that the ways of working differ. So Mason, you seem like you were ready, so.
Yeah, I wrote a book on virtual work, oddly enough, during the pandemic, and it had nothing to do, I mean, I swear when we got the contract opportunity, it was, it just, the pandemic happened. And as we were diving deep into our interviews with subject matter experts, people in the field living remote work, people with disabilities, et cetera, what we found is that, yes, of course, the younger crowd, young adults, in this case with disabilities, young adults in general, for them, they want a little bit of on-site and a little bit of remote. And for them, the remote bit is really just a matter of having the flexibility and taking a day for themselves, but also remaining productive, right? I think we can all agree to that. Who are we trying to kid? I mean, that's the whole value proposition of remote work. However, when it comes to those remote days, particularly, building community is mission critical. So when we look at it from the higher education front, allowing for simulation-based learning, training curricula on adapting to remote kind of environments where you do team differently, interact differently, collaborate differently, engage differently, celebrate one another for your accomplishments differently, it would make a world of difference. Because there is a polarizing effect when you go back on site, to your very credit, looking for the nearest exit, because you cope differently, right, in different contexts. For people with disabilities especially, students here at this very university, they've mentioned to me in passing, anecdotally, I will never disclose my disability to my employer. That's why I opt for remote work, because it's one less thing to worry about as a woman, right, particularly. And so the double bind in this case is moot because of remote work advantages. But when the rhetoric changes and it becomes hybrid, then what then? Right?
Can I piggyback on that? So I have a son who graduated in May from Rutgers, Newark. He started his first real job, we call it. And he's been going in, he's fully in the office. He has a disability. He lost hearing in his left ear. When he was he was at a prior school, and he actually was, and I am not a fan of the fraternity system. He was in a fight when he was at Sacred Heart, and he was hit overhead and lost a hearing in his left ear. So in school, he doesn't like wearing a hearing aid, but in class, he puts in a small apparatus so he could hear his professors and everybody. But he went through the whole remote learning and things of that nature, but he did go to in person in Newark. So when he started this job, I told him, did you disclose your disability? And because at times, if you're standing in one side of it, he could hear you better. Sometimes he'll ask, excuse me, could you repeat the question? So he goes to me, no. And I said, Jules, I really want you to disclose your disability. I go, because it will work for you. Again, if the last thing you want is your employer to think you're not listening to them, because you really can't hear them clearly. So he said, fine, Mom. So he came in from coming into the city on Tuesday, and he goes, I spoke to my supervisor. I told him that I have hearing loss, and that at certain meetings, I will bring my hearing device to those meetings if I know there's going to be a lot of people in it. And he goes, it felt like a breath of fresh air. His supervisor was so responsive to him telling them that he had this hearing loss. So I'm grateful that he did it, that he advocated for themselves. I think, again, us in this room and many of you that are educators should really enforce that. Tell those young children it's okay to say that something is going on, because you have to advocate for yourself, because nobody's going to know when you walk in. Again, I hesitate sometimes to disclose, but I think right now, this generation, we should give them the availability to disclose.
As well. So one of the things that comes to mind for me is the way that before the pandemic, generations learned how to interact appropriately and behave appropriately in the workplace was generally through osmosis. Nobody told you what to do. You learned it by making mistakes and finding out that now this person who sits next to you doesn't like you so much anymore. So you better figure that out. Which for the record has never worked for neurodiverse people. And so I think now we're seeing an opportunity where we have to be more explanatory about why things work a certain way and why it's going to work for you if you do X, Y, and Z. I manage 3 people who are members of this generation, and I have been much more explicit. Here's what's happening. Here's the expectation of you that they're not telling you. And here's the consequence if you make this decision versus this one. And it has paid tremendous dividends. They want to know, just like we all do. And we all kind of went through this weird struggle of, well, I guess I'll figure it out. And it was harder for some of us than others. And so let's just make their lives a little bit easier. Here's the expectations and here's why. And it might not make sense. Maybe it does make sense. It's just a weird cultural quirk or whatever it happens to be. But that also works really well for people who are coming from other cultures who don't have the experience of the US work culture. We can be prescriptive to them too. Here's what the expectations are. Here's what they're not saying. And here's what they're expecting of you. So just be a little bit more explicit.
I think there's been a shift in the workplace too, right? It's highly competitive now, and people have options unlike they've had before. And if you think about Gen Z, they're staying in roles about 18 months. If they don't like what's happening, they're leaving. So employers have to invest a lot more in their onboarding and their training and what you were talking about in that role modeling too. That's really important, but it's no longer where someone's just going to stay somewhere because they have to. There's been a shift in the economy. I think everyone spoke about entrepreneurship, that people are pursuing that more. So we have to do a lot more on the other end to retain people. Because the cost of the loss of knowledge and the lack of transfer of that knowledge is really great for companies. So I do think we're seeing shifts on both sides, and it's making us think differently about how we continue to retain and develop our workforce. So it's still something that I think we're all learning because it's the first time we're experiencing this and thinking differently about the ways in which people communicate. There's a lot of abbreviations and mnemonics that have come into the workplace that you haven't seen before. But this has been great. Thank you so much. I've really learned so much from all of you today and really appreciate you being so open, honest, and vulnerable. And I'm pretty sure they can connect with you during the lunch break. So we'll talk to you then. Thank you so much.